All right, and we are live. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our January movie club, which is really a December January movie club. We don't meet in December. Um, so, welcome to 2025. This is our first club meeting of the year. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a little bit of housekeeping here. Um, If you've seen any of our streams or joined us in the past, you know all of this, so feel free to zone out for the next couple of minutes. But I'm going to go through my little spiel anyways for anybody that is watching for the first time. Um, so this is our movie club, but we actually have three different media clubs. And let me see, I have a slide here for it. We have two monthly clubs, our movie club and our listening club, as well as a quarterly book club. And our book club's actually also meeting this month, so we have all three of our things. Um, and then we actually announce our picks at the start of every month in our Facebook group, which I have put the link up to on the screen. We don't just do the multimedia clubs. We also have weekly feedback meetings and like artist talks and things along those lines. And it's also just a really nice community of artists and other creative people just talking about issues or sharing their work and things like that. So absolutely feel free to join us there. You can also suggest things for us to watch or listen or read. Right now, I actually have a poll up in our Facebook group for our next book club pick. So I'm actually going to take it down tomorrow afternoon. So if you are joining to pick a book for our next book club, you better get on that fast. And if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, we do have a Patreon. Everything that we do is provided free of charge for our members. That includes meetups, all these clubs, all of the meetings, everything that we do. But if you'd like to help us cover some of the costs that come in for that, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $2 a month. Yeah, I think that was everything. Our listening club is happening tomorrow night, and our book club is happening on Sunday, and these picks will be announced on Saturday. If you are joining us live, which isn't really common for these, but just in case anyone out there just happens to be listening to it at right this second, you can actually join the conversation live. If you post a comment on this, we can see it and we can respond to you. If you're watching it on the replay, you can still comment on it. I would love to discuss any of our media choices with you guys. That includes these ones or any of our past picks. I just really like talking about things. So let me know. Let me know your feelings. And tonight, I'd like to know everyone's feelings on Rear Window, which is a 1954 Alfred Hitchcock movie that I am a huge fan of.
Yeah, it was fun watching this again. I think the last time I saw it was in film school. So,
Yeah, that's what my husband also said is he didn't watch it with me. I've actually seen this movie so many times, but he also said that he hasn't seen it since film school, which is ridiculous to me because I think this is an insanely good movie.
well, I've
I
seen
imagine
like the remakes and spin-offs, but not the original since then.
I've never seen any of the remakes. I'm a little nervous about them. I thought about watching one and then I didn't do it. I'm sure Derek has also seen this movie more than once.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's been a few years though. So yeah, I rewatched it again this time on the Criterion channel. Um, and yeah, it's an incredible movie. It's probably my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie, and it's just amazing in general.
Yeah, I had a hard time picking what I was going to use as a cover, and I decided to just go with this kind of generalized view of the courtyard because I think the courtyard is like the main character of this movie.
Hmm.
And also a set that he like really designed and worked on and like did just masterful moves of showing you the layout of the land of it and show all of these little vignettes and incredible set that they built and it took like a lot of work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
including I found out that he also like had a bunch of like a team of photographers go to New York City and like film and take photographs of a bunch of cities or a bunch of buildings and areas in like different times of day and different lighting and different weather. So,
yeah, I watched a few things on YouTube about like the making of this one. Unfortunately, the Criterion channel doesn't have the special features that it sometimes has for some movies. But I watched one video that said this little courtyard is based on an actual courtyard in Greenwich Village, but then um, Hitchcock had the whole thing designed. Some people said it was on the Paramount lot. I haven't fact checked that or anything, but it might be true. And yeah, the incredible amount of thought that went into like the positioning of Jimmy Stewart's room, how it's like in the middle, um, both vertically and horizontally. So he has a full view of anyone. If he just turns his head to the left or the right or up or down, he can see into all of the different apartments. And um, yeah, it's absolutely incredible set design.
yeah. It was Paramount Studios, Stage 17. Um,
It's
I
an
just happened
incredibly
to
intricate.
scroll down to that exact fact while you were saying that. So, just for confirmation, it was the Paramount lots.
It's a incredibly intricate set, which you know is something you don't see a lot of these days anymore. Which, when you're thinking about, because what was really impressive to me watching this again was just the timing that everything was on. Like you had there, the shot timing was really fleshed out in this movie, and they had to have secret like passageways that weren't visible to the camera so that people could get from this place to that place in the exact right amount of time. It was very impressive. It's like watching a play almost.
Definitely like watching a play. Also, like as far as the timing goes, I guess I should say this when I'm doing like all of my little bit, but there will be spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, absolutely watch it and then come back to us. Um, but just like the timing, I think specifically of like Grace Kelly giving Thorwald the note saying, "What did you do with her?" Like that timing is like so precise. If she disappears around a corner right when he opens the door, and like it's just so exact that like I wonder how many takes it had to like they had to do it in.
You know what? Interestingly, I found myself thinking about this a lot while I was watching because it is so complex and intricate. Um, it doesn't seem like they did a whole lot of retakes because there are a few moments in the dialogue where there are misspeaks, and so it kind of feels like Hitchcock was like, "Okay, great, we got it. Moving on."
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't read anything about how many takes they did. But yeah, like everything about the movie is extremely precise. At least it seemed that way to me. Just the editing and the timing of the actors walking around, like you all have been saying. And also, one last thing that I watched on one of the YouTube videos is that the actress for Miss Torso, the ballerina dancer who lived in the apartment straight ahead that we're looking at right now on this photo, apparently the actress actually lived in that set because it was, a rent-free apartment, basically. It wasn't actually in New York City, but she lived there to I don't know, just save on rent, I guess.
During
So
shooting or something?
yeah, apparently.
Huh.
That's really interesting. Um, because all of the apartments are just so flat so that you can see like most of them.
Yeah, I feel like we can probably see the most of what's going on inside hers out of everyone because of the big windows. But
Also, it's kind of the one that Jeffries like looks in the most. I mean, he's
I mean,
uh
he likes her, so
yeah. Um I always want to ask just because, but like what did you get out of this movie? Like what was the themes that you really latched onto with it?
oh, that's an interesting question.
I'm trying to ask at the start of every movie because I think when you consume media, and like we were talking about this recently on one of our coffee and creatives calls, of just like the art as it's intended to be shown versus what you take. And so like I feel like asking what the themes are of the movie versus like what's your takeaway are like two different questions. So I'm interested in like people's interpretations. Like how did you interpret this movie?
Yeah, I got probably a few different things during this rewatch. I would say, like, a lot of the dialogue is about voyeurism. Like, you know, when people come to Jimmy Stewart's apartment, they either like chide him for being a voyeur, or eventually all of them join in with his voyeurism and like just start watching because they think there's been a murder. So there's a theme of voyeurism. And another thing I noticed this time is that it's kind of about attention as well, because often when, as a specific thing, I noticed there was a scene where Jimmy Stewart was watching Miss Lonely Hearts doing something, and then someone else walked in the door behind Jimmy, and he turned around and paid attention to that person. So it seems like it's about. Oh, and with regards to the main plot, um, it's also kind of like Jimmy Stewart's attention has been taken from Grace Kelly's character and moved outward to this murder that he's sort of piecing together, and also the other apartments. So it's kind of like, I don't quite know how to sum it up in terms of like a quick sentence theme, but I do think um, the movie is saying something about attention and what grabs people's attention, specifically that murder grabs people's attention. And um, Miss Lonely Hearts almost suffers for it because Jimmy's attention is taken by the murder, and he almost misses her suicide attempt, and so on. So I don't quite know how to sum it all up, but I think attention and voyeurism are pretty prevalent.
I think you've got a point there about the attention that he pays to certain things, because there is a scene where when he's watching the the guy, I forget his name, supposedly dismantling the body and disposing of pieces. And he's like trying to stay awake because it's late at night, obviously. And so he's like trying to stay awake and then eventually falls asleep around like 5 in the morning. So he misses the woman in black leaving with him, which, if he had seen that happen, would we even have a movie? Because then he would be like, oh, well, obviously that's her. I must have been cooking up stories or something. But he missed that part. So, yeah, that's interesting.
I think for me it's definitely voyeurism, but I think also a lot of the attention is on like him avoiding his own life by like imagining all of these other lives that he knows nothing about. Like there's also like a really neat symmetry that I like where he's watching all of these people and it's literally like Thorwald carrying a body out in tiny little briefcases next to like Miss Torso just doing her hair. Of just
Thorwald,
like
that's right.
all of these people can just like exist and you have no idea what's going on the other side of the wall, and like you exist in this area with all of these people and you just know nothing, the same way that like uh Jeffries uh doesn't pay attention to Grace Kelly, but also all of these things that he's paying attention to, he's getting his own takeaway that like Grace Kelly isn't like. I think at some point she talks about Miss Torso and is like, no, she's waiting. She's fending off wolves while waiting for her lover to come back. And she was absolutely right on that. But for like Jeffries, she's just kind of
playing the field.
But also, he doesn't pay attention to people in happy scenarios. He regularly like looks at like there's like a family that's like playing with dolls in the balcony and it's just like, and we'll scoot past that.
Yeah,
so
is it avoiding his life though, or is it just a factor of boredom? Like he's been off his feet for 6 weeks with nothing to do and nowhere to go, and I mean TV ownership was not super common in these days, and obviously he doesn't own one, so what else is he gonna do?
So I actually watched this with commentary one time, and it was like every single vignette is a possible outcome for like what his relationship with Grace Kelly could look like. Of she clearly wants to marry him, and the people that he's paying attention to is the hot girl across the way that's playing the field. And then also like this awkward married couple that's like sleeping on the fire escape, which I totally get because I've been in a humid city in the summer. And then like a literal murder, like there's a man that murders his wife. There's also like the newlyweds who are, it's just him being exacerbated with his wife, or supposedly you don't really see a lot of that. And then Miss Lonely Hearts, who isn't getting attention whatsoever that she wants and is kind of fantasizing. So it's him fantasizing about all these lives that he knows nothing about. It's kind of a grass is always greener. But also, what a great courtyard to have a broken leg next to.
Yeah, and that everyone leaves their shades open so you can actually watch what's going on. Like that wouldn't happen today.
All of these large windows.
Yep.
Kind of jealous of them.
Yeah.
Seriously, and especially in New York City, that doesn't really happen. Usually the windows are like tiny.
I also really like how they kind of use it like it's a stage play of using like the curtains, and I think Grace Kelly even closes them and goes show's over at one point.
Yeah, and yeah, I would almost say that it's like multiple plays put together, and he's just like turning between different stages of like multiple plays happening. And also, I don't know if there's been confirmation of this, but supposedly his window itself is proportioned with the same aspect ratio as a movie screen at the time. So it is like, in a way, it's kind of like the audience is looking at the movie screen, looking out his window. And yeah, the curtains open in the beginning and they close at the end. So yeah, it's definitely playing with curtains and like the trappings of like the theater, but also the movie theater. And
also, there's a live band.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was one other detail that I like picked up on during this rewatch. I must have forgotten it or something. But anyway, yeah, there's just no like outside music. There's just the songwriter playing the piano and like sometimes
I noticed that in his room. I noticed that too, that like there's no score really. It's just whatever happens to be playing in the apartment in the complex where all the apartments are. Like you hear snippets of somebody playing like some music on the radio and then the live band and just chatter. So that I found really interesting.
Yeah,
that's
and
watching this time too.
I will say that was pretty unusual for this time period. Like if you watch 1950s movies, they're just full of music. Like there's constant sweeping scores and like orchestral music everywhere. So to have a movie like this where a lot of scenes are just silent or with city noises in the background or with rain noises, it does seem pretty unusual for the time period.
Yeah, it works really well for building the tension.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
and also Alfred Hitchcock makes his cameo in the songwriter's apartment, so
winding the
it kind
clock.
of seems like he's directing the songwriter to like give the score of the movie or something. I don't know.
I think he said once that that was his parallel, was the writing of the song was in line with the making of the movie. So he's writing the song throughout the entirety that the movie's being made, and then it finishes with the song being completed. And the song is named Lisa, which is the name of Grace Kelly's character. Um, One of the things that I really, really like about this movie, and I really like about like Alfred Hitchcock in general, is just like his ability. One, I think he came from like silent film. This movie is essentially like a series of silent films and would still work as a silent film. There's so many visual gags, but I thought about this because I found that a lot of times the music didn't align with what was happening on the screen. But there were a lot of times where the words that were spoken also weren't in line with what you were seeing on the screen. There's a lot of like Jeffrey's like, and he does admit it later on in the movie, but he like talks about Lisa, about like her being too feminine for him, and like she's always in these gowns and everything, and she's the only person that does anything because he wants a wife that can keep up with him, and yet he's the one that's just stuck in a wheelchair.
Well, from what we see, but outside of the, context of the film, he's like a gallivanting world traveling photographer.
Yeah, but he's constantly telling Lisa that she's not equipped to deal with his lifestyle, and she just is the only more adventurous than him.
Yeah.
She snuck into a man's apartment by climbing through a window, from a move that I wouldn't do in flat shoes
Yeah, and she did it in a full dress and
and high heels. Like,
yeah, and that scene was really funny to me because that's kind of when he realizes, oh wait, she's not who I thought she was. Like, and so he kind of likes it, but then he realizes that she's in danger, and then
at the end, she's reading a book on the Himalayas that as soon as he falls asleep, she puts down and picks up Harper's Bazaar. Um,
Yeah, I will say like about the Grace Kelly and Jimmy Stewart's relationship between their characters, not the actors themselves, but it is very interesting that this movie um just um like doesn't really have any stakes for these characters. They could just like get married and be happy together. And it's also like it's always been a bit strange to me that like Grace Kelly is throwing herself at Jimmy Stewart, but his whole thing is that he's bored with her or something. It's like the weirdest lack of conflict in any movie that I can think of almost. Like yeah, I don't know if I'm expressing this right, but like I don't know. It seems and but during this rewatch, I did kind of understand his whole thing a bit more because it seems like Grace Kelly's character is higher class than him, and that can like produce some like conflicts in a relationship.
Yeah, well,
But
and she expects a certain level of um, living standard too, which is not what he's used to. And I just looked up because I was curious because she mentions in the beginning of the movie that the dress she's wearing in the first scene is $1,200. In 1954, that was about $14,000 today, over that. So it's like he's a photographer. Like that's a little beyond his reach.
I assume that they met because he was the photographer on a set, because it's pretty clearly implied that she's a model. Um, but I also want, like, I've had this question, but like, does Jeffries have like his own doorman? Because like you never really see it, and like this part of New York like doesn't usually like, I don't know, but she kind of just like appears at his door with a man carrying champagne and like a weird metal box full of lobster. And it's the only time you see that character. And I'm like, did she bring him with her, or did she get help from like the doorman? I've always had that question. But
I I
that's
I just kind of assume from watching it, because there were a lot of services back then that don't really exist anymore, but that it would be like a delivery guy from the high-end restaurant she ordered from or something. I don't know.
and he goes ahead and puts it in the oven for her.
Well, yeah,
Oh no,
because he's like a concierge,
yeah, he's a concierge.
So
I was always just fascinated by her choice of like a lobster dinner, but also just the thing that they brought it in, because I've never seen that in real life. This is the only place I've ever seen that. And I'm like, this must be a thing that existed back then, but I've never seen one. And it's always fascinated me. So that's a little fun thing. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
hi, Tim.
I apologize for my tardiness. I was taking a test.
That's all right.
No worries. I am going to ask you a question that I asked everybody else at the beginning, because it's something that I'm always interested in, and I feel like I've finally gotten a handle on it. But like, I think I've always phrased it as like, what did you get out of the movie? Like, what themes did you take from this?
Oh, um, wow, I wasn't prepared for that
I
question.
know you joined in, and I just like threw a hardball. Like, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, but I first saw this film when I was in my 20s, and for me, the thing that it's always been is that it was the film that I fell in love with Grace Kelly completely. I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Um, and I watched it again. I think it's probably the fourth or fifth time I watched it last night. And a lot of things occurred to me that didn't necessarily occur to me before. There are a lot of questions. It's interesting that she uses the term rear window ethics, because there's a lot of ethical questions that I don't think occurred to me. The thing that always hits me about this film is in the beginning, I always forget about how shitty he treats her at the beginning of the film. He's such a fucking ass to her. And so that's always front and center for me when I see this. And but I realized that thematically, who is the antagonist in this is not as clear cut as I always thought it was, and it becomes really apparent to me in that last scene, when Raymond Burr comes into his house or into his apartment, and I all of a sudden strangely had this empathy for Raymond Burr's character, and I realized that what Jimmy Stewart's character, what Jeffries is doing throughout the film, there's a very questionable thing ethically about spying on the people in you're spying on your neighbors. And Hitchcock talks about this in the Truffaut Hitchcock interviews. That was kind of, you get the sense that was kind of the idea, to question, you know, Jeffries represents us. We identify with Jeffries, and then I think it was intentional that Hitchcock makes Raymond Burr's character somewhat, what's his name, Thorvald, Mr. Thorvald, makes him all of a sudden. I had a tinge of empathy for him, and in that moment, Jeffries becomes kind of the antagonist a bit. And I think he realizes that, and that's why he doesn't answer Thorvald when he asks him, "What do you want from me?" And he says, "I don't have any money." And Jeffries just kind of sits there. And I don't know. It's caused me to challenge my seeing the film now has caused me to challenge my ideas about where that line is between protagonist and antagonist in this film. A lot of things about privacy and peeping Tomism that just hadn't occurred to me for some reason until I watched it last night.
I
Yeah, I
think
think there
Doyle
is.
at some point actually does bring up, I think also Thelma Ritter at some point. I feel like I'm splitting between like whether or not I say the actor's name or the character name, so it's probably a little bit confusing. That's fine. I just say whichever one comes first.
Yeah, I think there is a valuable conversation that extends into, modern day about ethics and surveillance and things like that, because, you know, back then they didn't have nearly as robust a surveillance apparatus as we do now. And so we're running into a lot of those same kind of questions. Like, when is it immoral to spy on someone you suspect of doing something heinous?
Especially with how little evidence that they have. Like everything points to them being incorrect. And they
Well,
just
and
keep going for it.
yeah,
I
and
think
like I
Derek was
mentioned,
right. There's like no, there's barely a plot here. Like,
And like I mentioned in the beginning, had he not fallen asleep, he would have seen that other woman leaving the apartment and just assumed that everything was fine. So he's operating off of a completely like construed of whole cloth assumption.
it's such a weird scene, that one, because the pretty much this entire movie is from Jeffrey's point of view. Like when you're watching it, the camera's always at his height. Like you're kind of looking up on other characters. Everybody's apartment you're looking into is from his apartment window. Um, so you're either looking down on people or you're looking up. Um, and there's like a couple of scenes that get shifted just for the sake of storytelling, but that was one of them where he's asleep. But every other time, like you were seeing it from his point of view. The other one is when he's writing the letter, it's suddenly like the camera's up really high looking down. And I've always questioned that shot, but I also can't imagine it being any other way because you have to see what's written on the paper. And how are you going to do that otherwise without really kind of breaking the scene or making the characters act awkwardly?
Well, in the other instances, after the dog is killed, the camera, for whatever reason, punches in close on a few characters, and that really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Francois Truffaut pointed that out during their conversation, and Hitchcock says, "Absolutely, I did that intentionally." And that is the only scene in the movie where he did that with the camera. And
Yeah, that was a really interesting narrative device because it kind of makes you feel what they're feeling in the moment. It makes it more sympathetic what's happening, and like you put yourself in their shoes of like listening to this woman just screaming about her beloved dog dying, and then they all look very sympathetic. They're all like very
Human.
Yeah, in their expressions, and then as soon as the scene ends, they just walk away.
Yeah, they go back to not being real people that exist to Jeffries. But that is their one moment of having their own lives that aren't his.
Well, and they go back to just being like neighbors who don't interact with each other. Like they don't talk to this woman on a daily basis. It's just like, oh, that's so sad. And then they walk away, which is so typical of our experience.
I found this is one of the things that I found interesting in the Truffaut Hitchcock interview was that Truffaut responded as most people would have back then. He said, well, it's not like it was a child; it was just a dog. And Hitchcock is the one who shows empathy for the dog, and he says, yes, but that dog was that couple's child. And I was just kind of astounded. I would have expected Truffaut to take that position and Hitchcock to be the one to say, well, it was only a dog. But he understood that relationship between people and their animals, which is why this is such an important scene in this movie.
Yeah, and I would say like speaking of attention earlier, like this is the moment that actually gets everyone's attention in terms of like the neighbors. Most of the people are kind of oblivious to the supposed murder that happened. It's just Jimmy Stewart watching through his binoculars, but everyone comes out and sees the aftermath of the dog, other than Thorvald. But I also think it's a really brilliant shot when Thorvald is just in the dark of his apartment, but he's smoking something and it's
Mhm.
just a glowing ember. That's utterly fantastic.
Mhm.
I love
If
the
you're not paying
cinematography.
attention, if you're not paying attention, you can miss that ember. Because I was looking at my, and I can just barely, and I'm thinking, am I really seeing the cigarette, or is that just something? Is that a flaw in the film?
I don't think I saw it like the first couple of times that I watched, but so I wasn't really like, I feel like it almost was I wasn't paying attention. But yeah, it took me a really long time to see that as well. But once you see it, it's very obviously there.
And it felt to me intense because you, the way the way the writer and Hitchcock structured it, Thorvald doesn't realize that he's being watched, and yet seeing that shot with the cigarette, how does he not see across the way to see that he's being observed?
Yeah,
And
especially since he's completely in the dark.
yeah, I just that was
Because
that was
everybody's in their own little worlds. And I feel like almost they break out of their own little worlds a little bit. I'm always fascinated by the fact that Miss Lonely Hearts actually meets the composer.
you asked me about theme, and the other thing is that in all the years that I've watched this film, it's always been about the plot of Stewart watching and the murderer and that. But what occurred to me this time was that all these different windows that he's looking in are different facets of how he views relationships and the idea of marriage and the connection to the fact that Lisa wants to marry him and he does not want to get married. And why does she stay with him?
Oh, she could
Somebody
do so
tell
much
me.
better.
You
Like
know, I found their relationship very relatable. I've definitely been in that relationship. It sucks. So
she comes back too. She's like, "Goodbye. Don't you mean like good night?" I mean what I said. And then she like comes back. She's literally throwing herself at
yeah,
him.
it's
He
funny
can't do
because
better.
I feel like if it were written today, she that would definitely be like a conflict point where like she would storm out and leave and then you wouldn't know if she was coming back. But she literally says that she'll be back the next day. She's like, and he's like, how long are you gonna be gone? Or when am I gonna see you again? Not until tomorrow night.
He I guess he I mean I understand his position. I understand what he gets as a person out of his job. I understand his connection to his job, and I understand his feeling that that's a compromise that would force him to compromise. And she even says what the compromise would be. Well, you get a job where I can get you all these sessions and blah 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 blah, and that's not what he wants. So I get it on that point. Um I don't understand what's in it for her. I just, and part of that is I look at her and I think, my God, this is the most beautiful woman in the world. And Jimmy Stewart's a handsome guy, but if this guy is treating her like that, and she's flawed as well. I mean, she suggests, in her problem column, is that she doesn't really respect what he does. She says, "Oh well, traveling the world and being muddy and all that's not important. You're just the photographer." She clearly does not understand what he gets out of what he does. So once that comes up, I feel more empathy for him in that regard. But it's still the way he abuses her verbally just does not sit well with me.
Yeah, yeah. This time, rewatching it, I mean, I've always kind of felt that way about this movie, but this time I really laughed at one of his lines where I can't remember the order in which this happens, but there's a scene kind of near the middle where Grace Kelly walks into the apartment, and the first thing Jimmy Stewart says to her is, "What did you do to your hair?" And she gets offended, but then he's like, "Oh, look out the window! Something just happened." Um, that just made me laugh with how cruel it is to just
Yeah.
insult her and then point to this supposed murder that happened.
He
Um,
insults her, and it doesn't look like she took it as an insult. Like she starts to explain how she did her hair, and he just ignores it and moves on.
yeah.
There's a
But yeah,
lot
what,
of humor in this movie. There's a lot of great deliveries.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I would say like there's also like a lot of humor in, oh, I can't remember the actress's name, but she
Selma
is
Ritter.
the nurse who like massages him,
yeah,
and
Thelma Ritter.
she's always saying like inappropriate things, like how the body was cut up and things like that. That was pretty funny to me.
She's kind of works as the exposition almost. Um, she actually like explains things in a way that makes it very clear to the audience of what is happening. She's the brains.
And she got tapped for that role a lot in a lot of her work. She's in a film with a lot of great performances, she kind of stands out in Pickup on South Street with Jason Robards as well. Um, just for playing that kind of character, you can't, in any film she ever did back then, you can't miss her. She always stands out from the rest of the cast for some reason.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one, or I'm not sure if I've seen her in anything else, but yeah, I think a lot of great character actors from this time period were sort of typecast, not necessarily in a bad way, but if they did a role excellently, they would be put into other movies doing a similar role. And so, yeah, I totally believe that she was able to do this in other movies as well.
Impeccable cast all around, actually.
I was thinking about something today, and I wonder what you guys think about this. And I was because I know Hitchcock made the film he wanted to make. I also know that there were certain requirements that producers would have restrained him in a certain way. And I was thinking about if it almost feels like when she's in his apartment and the cops come in and rescue her, it almost feels a little false. I feel like somebody who really wanted, the guy who made Psycho, the Hitchcock who made Psycho, who has his lead actress murdered, I think that Hitchcock would have had Raymond Burr's character murder Lisa as well. Um, and I was thinking, who would have done that? Who would have done that scene properly would have been David Fincher. David Fincher wouldn't have even thought twice about having Lisa get killed, and then Jeffries having to deal with that. That would have been a whole other movie without a happy ending. That's more of the ending of Seven.
Definitely a very different movie, and definitely moves very away from the themes that I think Alfred wanted to like
Yeah,
wanted to explore.
I feel like this movie was not intended to be a deep exploration of the consequences of, these kinds of intrusions. It's more of like thought provoking, but not like going really, really that deep into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he wants to explore the areas that he wants to explore. I think that idea that I have there comes from my sort of dislike for Jeffrey's character, and want to see him realize, you know, realize what he's got and what he's, you know, pushing away from him, and his treatment of her. You know, I think that happens, then he would have realized that, oh, I was in love with her, and I should have married her, but no, I don't get that chance because she's dead.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't think I've ever considered like what would happen if she got murdered in that scene. Um, and Psycho was still a few years away from this, but I will say, I watched an interview with the screenwriter of this movie on YouTube. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but you'll probably be able to find it. Oh, is it on here?
Yeah,
John
John
Michael
Michael
Hayes.
Hayes.
Yeah, that guy. There was an interview on YouTube where he talked about like the tone of the movie and what Hitchcock wanted from him. And Hitchcock supposedly hired him because he made humorous murder mysteries for the radio. And so, yeah, the general tone of this movie is kind of supposed to be humorous, but yeah, it is. You should watch the whole interview because it is pretty interesting. But I will also say, like, he had a great experience writing this movie because he said that Hitchcock generally just left him alone and let him work and like didn't try to micromanage the script itself. But yeah.
I'm very curious about Hitchcock's directing method because he simultaneously has such like intricate details that clearly he knew about while also leaving everybody to do their jobs, and it's such like an interesting balance that I have a lot of not questions but just interest in the process.
Yeah, I would love to see the script for this movie because a lot of it plays out silently, like you said, Rebecca, like a play that you're watching from a distance, you can't hear what's going on. So it'd be interesting to read how that was written.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never read any of his scripts. I think he put in more shot descriptions than you would see in a modern script. But yeah, it would be interesting to read. And I will say just about like the precision of this movie, it seems to me like every shot in the movie almost is like just perfect, just perfectly paced. The camera is pointed in the perfect direction. Um, just like the editing is brilliant and the cinematography is brilliant. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this movie and like Hitchcock's precision in general.
There's a choreography about this film, and it's in a way it's similar to Rope, because Rope takes place in one large room. Of course, the set they did there was much more complex, but because when he in those two films he limits himself to a space, and then has to figure out what compromises he makes to get to tell the story, to have the people where he needs them, and while Rope takes place in one apartment, there's a lot more stuff going on in this film, where we see the world outside of the apartment complex in that one corner, which he uses a lot, and we see the ground below, and we see each apartment, and sometimes we see the whole wall of apartments, and it's uh, and the way he places where he chooses to place Jimmy Stewart in the shot, and where what's his name, where Wendell Corey is, and where Thelma Ritta is, and where Grace Kelly is, and there's just more so than any other film. There's a complex choreography about Notorious as well, and what's another film that I was thinking of? I can't remember of his. He always does. I mean, that's the thing with Hitchcock. The story is always there for the average viewer to see, but when you the where the rubber hits the road with Hitchcock is the craft of how to tell the story. Nobody before Hitchcock was telling stories the way that he does. The craft is so meticulous, and we've had directors and writers and filmmakers since who have built off that legacy. Some have just straightforward stolen from it, like Brian De Palma does, but the level of craft in Hitchcock's films, and as when we get to this film, when we get to Rear Window, that's as Hitchcock is just firing on all cylinders. When he was doing his films in Britain, he's learning the craft, and when he first gets to the States, he's learning more about the craft. But the time you get to the series of films, around this one, he's Hitchcock full blown. It's very precise filmmaking that just it's why we still talk about him, because it's stunning, his attention to detail. It just amazes me.
Yeah, and I'll only add to that, during this rewatch, it kind of struck me how experimental this was for the time for a studio movie. Just because the whole thing takes place in Jimmy Stewart's apartment, just looking out. And like I mentioned before, how there's no real score. There's just like the piano player in his apartment doodling on his piano or whatever. And yeah, like the experimentation was fine. And also just about like people inspired by Hitchcock, the scenes, like the shots of the different apartments, also just reminded me of Wes Anderson. Like, even though the tone and the plot are completely different from a typical Wes Anderson movie, just the framing of those people in their little world, how they all live in a little diorama that expresses their personality and so on and so forth, that really reminded me of Wes Anderson this time.
It's all very little doll houses with just people inside of them. Yeah, 100%.
I thought one of the funniest things about the film, which also relates to how Jeffries feels about the relationship, the idea of marriage, is the newly married couple, who are all hot for each other as soon as they move in, and then we constantly see the guy walk up to the window, and he looks just so worn out. And then his wife, it sounds like his wife is nagging him a little bit. So,
the new Thorwalds.
Huh?
The new Thorwalds.
The new Thorwalds, yes. We have the Thorwalds on one side, and then we see how the Thorwalds probably were when they first, got together. Maybe. I don't know.
We are coming up on an hour here, so I do want to gather if there's anything, final thoughts that anybody has.
I just think I don't know. Like I mentioned, I have had a relationship like this before, and the constant, just pressure for the woman to change to fit the man instead of meeting in the middle or making any other kind of compromise. I don't like it. She should have left.
Absolutely. I agree with that. It's her moving as opposed to him just still being in a wheelchair.
Yeah, well, and there is a point where, like we already talked about, where he realizes, oh, she's not the person I thought she was. She is adventurous. She can do these things. But she still has to change for him. Come on.
She wants him to take a job as a portrait photographer and fashion photographer.
There's got to be a place to meet in the middle, guys.
Yeah. Which clearly he's taken some of those jobs in the past, because, again, I'm pretty sure that's how they met.
I agree with your sentiment, Beckett, but at the same time, I'm also thinking about the fact she's rich. She doesn't have to work a fucking day in her life. And he's a working dude, and he's proud of the fact that he's a working dude. So I think there's compromises on both sides that would need to be made. My issue is the way he leads her on, treats her like shit. I know I've heard the stories about from women who've had these kinds of relationships where the guy is abusive and trying to get rid of them in some way. And I you know he wants her to be there when he wants her, but then he wants to do whatever he wants the rest of the time. And why in all the while I understand his working class attitude, the way he treats her as a way of dealing with this problem just really, really rubs me wrong. And you're right, she should tell him to fuck off.
I have a dream that Grace Kelly goes off and become like a world traveler while Jeffries is stuck at home.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she becomes an
She's reading the
international.
Himalayas book because she's gonna go.
She becomes an internationally acclaimed model and travels the world doing her own thing. There's an ending for you.
And later
Hitchcock.
becomes the Princess of Monaco.
she winds up in, I forget where To Catch a Thief takes place, but she winds up in, I think it was Monaco, and she winds up in Monaco getting romanced by I think it's, who is it, it's Cary Grant in To Catch a Thief.
Yeah, like I said, this guy reminds me like so much of my ex. Like I dated that guy, and it's like, I don't know, you get into a habit and it's comfortable and you like him, and maybe you even love him, and so it gets increasingly harder to just walk away because it's a sunk cost fallacy, right? It's like, well, I put all this time and effort into this man.
It's
I can't just
codependency.
walk away. That's part of it too, yeah. Until something egregious happens, and at that point it's harder to stay.
I think, based on my own experience, I think that's it's living in the past. You're in love with a person that's not there anymore. That person has grown into somebody else, and you still want them to be that person that you love, and they're not.
And I think specifically and this is reading between the lines, but in this specific instance, maybe it's easier for her to deal with while he's laid up because he can't go anywhere. She's kind of got him cornered in one place. And then once he heals up finally and he's off gallivanting across the world again, maybe then she finally realizes, oh, this is not what I
It's
wanted.
literally a textbook codependent relationship. Like,
Do they have?
Well, yeah, and because she's bringing him dinner and he's,
Yeah,
well, who's
no,
gonna
it's-
feed me when they break up for 5 minutes? Who's bringing me food?
Do you feel like these two characters have chemistry? I was just thinking
for
about that.
parts, but I think they have about as much chemistry as like Jeffries and Stella have. Like they're together for as far as things go. But yeah, I think they definitely don't work well as like a romantic couple.
No, I don't see them lasting long term.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. During this rewatch, it kind of struck me that kind of the modern equivalent of their general arc in the story, it would be like a couple who are bored with each other, but then they find that they have a love of true crime or whatever. And it does seem like Jeffries is bored with the normal life and he gets excited or turned on by murder or drama happening outside. So yeah, I don't think their relationship will last under normal circumstances. There needs to be a murder or something happening.
Well, and I think that partially has to do with his boredom of just his current situation of, being laid up with a broken leg. Because he mentions in the very beginning about how he's been watching out these windows for 6 weeks and nothing ever happens. So.
All right.
Be careful what you wish for.
Kind of.
That's the theme. Be careful what you wish for.
I think at some point Grace Kelly also be like, we are crazy people. We are getting upset because there's not a murder that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which honestly I understand. I love other people's drama.
That's another ethical issue there. What which I think Hitchcock was going at. We're disappointed that the murder didn't happen, and what the fuck is wrong with us?
Yeah, well, it's part of the the dark fascination with true crime and the debate surrounding the ethics of consuming that. That's been a discussion for as long as it's been a genre.
Yeah, also internet sleuths. We did just pass an hour, so I do have to end the call, unfortunately.
Oh, darn.
But thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to catch you guys on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.